Armageddon, apocalypse, annihilation, all words we have heard as a result of the war between Russia and Ukraine. A former Russian president and one of Vladimir Putin's top allies has warned a nuclear apocalypse will become more likely if the West continues to supply Ukraine with increasingly powerful weapons. I recently sat down with an expert who has spent the better part of his life making sure a nuclear apocalypse doesn't happen.
We're living in a world where trust, truth, fake news, deep fakes are our new reality.
Intelligence expert Rolf Larson speaking recently at the Citadel, a 25-year CIA operations officer who had numerous overseas assignments that took him to Europe, Russia, and the Middle East, says he's not thrilled about what he's seeing with the Russia-Ukraine war.
And what we've learned since the war in Ukraine is that we're at the highest risk of a nuclear weapon being used in war since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
Larson, a distinguished fellow at the Nuclear Threat Initiative in Washington, D.C., and works on global threat reduction, but says this war has turned our nuclear world upside down, nuclear norms and principles falling apart.
But all that would have to happen to see the risk shoot up to some number we don't like would be for Putin to have his back against the wall, which would mean one of two things. Either the Russian army is in danger of losing the war, and the second would be if he feels that Ukraine might take all the territory he sees from Ukraine and absorb administratively into Russia. And if either of those two conditions exist in the war, that's not the way it is today, but if that were to happen over the next several months as the Ukrainians go on the offensive, then I think it's a possibility we're going to see the nuclear threat really rise quickly.
The idea of mutually ensured destruction that pretty much everyone agreed with since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 isn't what it used to be. Larson says Vladimir Putin could resort to tactical nuclear weapons.
Tactical nuclear weapons are particularly scary because they never fell under any form of arms control agreements. And it's a more tempting thing to use than a massive nuclear weapon. But at the strategic scale right now, the U.S. and Russia are no longer observing all the things that we did voluntarily with one another based on treaties so we don't escalate to a nuclear crisis.
Technology, cyber, drones, Larson says, have upset the old equation.
Because the old equation of deterring one another was based on we couldn't win the war, so we shouldn't fight it. And it was based on what we called nuclear parity, which means both sides are balanced. And if both sides are now imbalanced because we're trying to gain advantages over one another, that upsets nuclear order.
Other areas of concern: emerging threats, biological technology, climate change, and AI, artificial intelligence. He says pay attention to these areas now and don't wait until we have a big surprise.
Where we're weak is, I worry about, is with all the emphasis on Ukraine, the war, which of course we have to have, so I'm not questioning that, or China, or Iran's weapons, what's the surprise that's going to hit us that we're not working on? It's kind of like we can do everything right and we miss the big 9/11, or we miss the collapse of the Soviet Union, we missed the Arab Spring in 2011-12. So something's coming. I mean, that's our lot in life, and I worry what that thing is, and sit back and prepare a little bit for that too. So I call that what's the future of intelligence is not just placing bets on the things that are happening today. It's preparing for things that we should expect to happen tomorrow.
And Larson told me during our conversation we need the NATO alliance more than ever for our national security, and that when it comes to China, he thinks we should bring them into strategic arms negotiations to avoid any, what he says, miscalculations. If you have an everyday hero, email me at bclark@wcbd.com or hit the Everyday Heroes link on our website, counton2.com.